Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. Please, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. I'm Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of CAIR, and I'm pleased to welcome my co-host, Hudayfa Shabazz, the Research and Advocacy Coordinator of CAIR National. Assalamu alaikum, Hudayfa. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam. Doing very well. How are you, Brother Edward?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. I almost introduced you at the start of the program, which would have been too early. I'm so eager. We're happy to have you as a co-host for the very first time. So thank you for joining us. David, why don't you tell our viewers about what today's program will be about, and welcome on our first guest.
Right. Today's program will be about the most recent crackdowns that have been happening in France on Muslim organizations and masajid, and the most recent proposal for the Antiseparatism bill. So we have a very special guest joining us, Yasser Louati, who is a French human rights and civil liberties activist. He is the president of the Justice and Liberties for All Committee. His work focuses on Islamophobia, national security policies, and social justice for minorities. So we are very glad to have Yasser with us, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for joining us. Wa alaikum assalam. Hudayfa has the first question for you.
So Yasser, thank you again for joining us here. So maybe we can just start off by asking you, what does your organization do? Just a little background for the audience, and just a little background on the kind of work you do, just the structure of it, and some of the things you're working on right now.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation and for allowing me to have a platform in the US where I go every year, multiple times per year, but not necessarily on this kind of platforms. So the CJN was actually set up 4 years ago already. And this is actually the culmination of 25 years of grassroots activism. And what I saw was that a set of skills were constantly being used, how can I say, in an atomized manner. So for example, we have an organization that works on getting in research done, another one on doing a training. So what the CJL does is literally to work on 3 fronts: production of knowledge through research and investigation. So we do our own investigations on corruption, racism, lots of Islamophobia, police brutality, and research that allows to get the facts right for campaigning. Right. And once you produce knowledge, that knowledge has to be disseminated, which means you do that through popular education by training people, raising public awareness, giving the appropriate tools to understand the a law being passed or what's happening today. And once we do that, well, people are ripe for mobilization. So then we have the last front, which is campaigns and strategic litigation. So it's still being done, but so far we have some great results, which make us think that the formula so far is good.
Alhamdulillah.
Awesome. I mean, it sounds like there's some real similarities between the work that you're doing there in France and the work that civil rights organizations do here in America, including, but not limited to CAIR. So happy to get to learn from you during this program. So Yasser, I want to ask you about the latest thing the French government is doing, this anti-separatism bill, as they call it. But first, just give us an overview. I mean, to be frank, what the heck is going on in France with the French government? Just give us an overview of the climate there, because from the outside looking in, it seems like the government has just lost its mind. But you're there, you do this work, you've been dealing with them for years. What? Just give us a lay of the land. What is going on in France right now? What's the climate like for French Muslims?
Well, France realizes that Muslims are here to stay, and they are no longer waiting for their identity to be defined by other than themselves. So we are seeing a transition from a judgment on Muslim identity to an affirmation of identity. And that affirmation of identity comes through having, organizations, organizing, campaigning for equality. And when we take a look at the past 40 years, for example, we see that French elites freaked out when it comes to Muslims, etc., the day they began organizing. So when the early mobilizations of the 1970s and 80s made national headlines, the elites were like, oh, they're here to stay. And on top of it, they're demanding equality. But things got worse, one decade after another. And what we see today is not only a strategy of Emmanuel Macron trying to run for re-election by pandering to the far right. He's really like surfing on a deeper wave of hard right ideas becoming mainstream, if not far right ideas. And for him, having failed not only economically, 1 million people have fallen below the poverty line in France this year. In the past 9 months, 60,000 people have died from COVID-19. I know in the US it's much worse, but according to for us here, it's a disaster. We see that all these safety nets for the working class have been dismantled one after another. Our foreign policy is a disaster, and on top of it, terrorist attacks. So to him, the safest way for him to get re-elected is to adopt a far-right software for him to position himself as the protector of national interests, national identity, national security, and the national economy. And for that, you need a scapegoat. So Muslims today are playing the role Jews played yesterday, the Spanish people as well, and the Poles and the Italians in the last century. What we see today is literally Muslims being the barometer of democracy and the rule of law in France, because for the government to adopt extremely repressive measures, you need, a minority. You went through the Patriot Act, you know what I'm talking about. So you have the political, marketing that says, don't worry about it, it's only about those problematic Muslims. Yeah, but those laws are not targeting everybody. And in 2015, 16, 17, there was, for example, the state of emergency that allows warrantless raids, shutting down places of worship, house arrests, etc., the law on mass surveillance. And all of those laws were adopted by using Islamophobia as a validator. So what you see today is just the culmination of decades of course, structural political failures, but on top of it, Muslims not having been able to uphold their rights. And of course, a political system in France, which is unlike in the US, we don't have checks and balances. So for example, we have a high concentration of political powers and economic powers within the same hands. So we have a weak parliament, for example. The president can dissolve the National Assembly, nominates the prime minister, he's above accountability, etc. All of this is making France, headlines, but on the back of Muslims. But ultimately, I tell French people, yeah, you feel safe today. And just like the state of emergency began targeting Muslims in the beginning, yeah, but today the state of emergency is being used against environmentalists, union leaders, and anarchists, to name a few. So there are reasons to worry, and understand people in the US being shocked over what's happening here in France.
Understood. And before I start talking to the I just want to ask about this anti-separatism bill. So here in America, we've heard of many things that have been done to the French Muslim community dating back years. I mean, the ban on hijabs in school settings, the ban on civil servants wearing public signs of their faith. We've seen Muslim women being arrested for wearing full body swimsuits at the beach. We've seen Muslim women facing arrests or fines for wearing face coverings at the same time that it's illegal in some places not to wear a medical face mask. So, we've seen all that. But now the latest thing is this anti-separatism bill. What is that? What are they trying to do with that? What does that mean?
Well, first, there has been no definition of what separatism means, just like there is no definition of radicalization. And when people use it, radicalization, Muslim radicals, in 2017, the French Senate, for example, admitted we don't have a definition of it, and quote unquote, the term has been adopted under the pressure of events. And this anti-separatism bill is about telling Muslims what kind of Muslims they can be. And if they ever organize or try to exist politically, they will be labeled separatists. The term separatism was first used in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter marches of June 2020. That's when the term first came, when you had people marching against police brutality and systemic racism, and of course continuing the silent campaign of calling out historic figures, rebranding street names, because with the colonization, many people who killed millions of Africans from where I come from are being praised as the heroes of the Republic. And Emmanuel Macron was like, okay, these people are separatists. So for him, if you listen to the speech he gave in early October of this year, 2020, it's literally anytime Muslims organize outside of what is permissible by policymakers, That's a problem. So that's why, to make this bill legitimate, he has to criminalize not only the practice of Islam as they understand it, criminalize Muslims when they are organized, and use some Muslims, of course, to validate this idea. And for that, they are doing exactly what was being done in the colonies back in Africa and Asia. You decide the good Muslim, and that good Muslim is going to act, for you as the validator. So it's not the CFCM, the French Council of the Muslim Faith, was set up in 2003 by the Minister of Interior, which is a violation of the secular law. So they blame Muslims for violating laicity and the secular law, but the government sets up bogus Muslim organizations to keep Islam and Muslims under control. And anything organized outside of the scope, that's problematic. And this law, make no mistake about it, and I insist, yes, it's going to begin by targeting Muslims, but that law will be used against any political dissenter. Because if they dissolve Muslim organizations based on a political decision without going before court, it becomes a precedent, then that's it. Apply it to, of course, the far left and the further to the center. And anytime they have disagreement with a political party, you're a separatist, we're going to dissolve you.
Hudayfa, please.
And Yasser, just wanted to jump in. And like you said, we were speaking on the far right. And what I've been seeing is this competition between Macron and his opposing parties and who can appease the far right the most, right? And we've seen a number of anti-Muslim measures being taking place right now, and there's a lot to choose from. But just going on one point, the French government is asking Muslim leaders to accept a charter of Republican values as part of a broad clampdown on quote-unquote radical Islam, which is not legally defined. So how does that really affect Muslim advocacy and free speech issues in France?
Well, I think now French Muslims are at a crossroads, and some difficult questions will have to be, answered. If the government can dissolve an organization like CCIF that's been in existence for 20 years, and that organization, it disappears within 2 or 3 weeks without even waging a battle in terms of mobilizing, organizing, there was nothing. They literally fled and shut down and, are trying to set up shop in London. That really raises the question, okay, so this organization disappears. What's left behind? Where are the people who are being trained? Where are people who are going to pick up the struggle and carry forward and challenge the decision? So these questions have to be answered. The second point that comes to your to mind when you ask this question is that the government did not do it out of nowhere. They had their reasons to believe they could do it. Right. It's like in I don't want to name the movie, but they go into a bank heist, and the police officer says, "Why are you doing it?" And the guy says, "Because I can." And that's exactly what the government is doing. So I can do it without having to justify myself. And speaking of French values, I wrote a piece called "The Glorious Hype and the Ugly Reality of French Values." I mean, what are French values, legally speaking? Again, there's no definition. It's a set of loosely defined ideas. We approximately know what it means, but again, we have nothing, that is legally binding. But when you have the president violating the Constitution by violating the law on laicity and the secular law, which separates church and state, when the same president violates all the conventions on human rights, the 1789 Declaration, the 1948 Convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, which grant freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion in private and public. Where are the French values, I ask? And for Emmanuel Macron to speak of French values, him who was elected with a minority because the majority of French voters abstained. The majority of French people did not go to vote. So Emmanuel Macron won the majority of the minority that went to vote. Where is democracy? His Minister of Interior is under investigation for rape and sexual assault. Where are the French values, I ask? people, the head of the National Assembly, what you would call in the U.S. the Speaker of the Assembly, like
Speaker of the House or something.
Speaker of the House, yes, exactly, like that, turtle head, Mitch McConnell. Sorry about that. I lost my yeah. The Speaker of the House in France is himself under investigation for conflict of interest. And various ministers in his own government, the Minister of Education, etc., the government is rigged with investigations on corruption and conflict of interest. Who are those people to tell Muslims who pay their taxes, who work, who want to be left alone, that they have to abide by French values? But this opens actually a parenthesis, if I have the time, is that they speak of separatism, yet nobody can define it. And I have not seen a single Muslim organization in France or Muslim leader calling for separation from the national body. But tax evasion costs us 100 billion euros per year. In France alone, that's $130 billion per year in tax evasion from the rich. Isn't that separatism? When you have ghettos for the rich in France, and that some cities would rather pay multi-million-dollar fines for refusing to open social housing for the working class and the low-income families, to make sure they only have the rich people in their, places, where residencies. That's geographical separatism. When you have white supremacy groups throughout France setting up training camps to train white people for the upcoming civil war, according to them, that would be between the white majority and French Muslims. So we have financial separatism, geographical separatism, racial separatism. Right. Nobody says a word about it. Yet Emmanuel Macron has created this problem to further criminalize Muslims and to make sure that even Muslims themselves internalize the idea that organizing is not good, will get you in trouble. And that's, for me, the worst part. It won't be the law. It would be Muslims adhering to the idea that, well, if I want to stay out of trouble, I shouldn't organize, I shouldn't support. And that may also affect the elites, who can support, entertainers, sports people, business people, etc. Be like, well, I'm successful, and if I start funding these organizations or these people who are activists, etc., I may lose my privilege. So this is more than a legal problem. It's also a psychological warfare being waged against Muslims today.
Right.
Fascinating. And Yasser, what's so interesting about the work that you're doing and just how you discuss this issue is that you discuss it, more than just how it impacts Muslims, more than just Islamophobia. You're talking about social, economic, structural problems with the French government, with the way French society is deteriorating, and it's impacting and threatening more than just French Muslims. Maybe French Muslims are the ones in danger right now, but in the long term, these government overreach and these other issues could endanger many more people. So, and we already have seen it endanger Muslim organizations. So, what is your organization doing on the ground to counter this, and what impact has this had? The French government's crackdown, its bigoted campaign, has it had on your organization, other Muslim organizations?
Well, the first thing we did is to be completely autonomous and independent. We don't take money from the government at all. It's even prohibited by our statuses. Our funding documents are clear. We shall not take any money from the government, because that becomes a leech, So first they're going to fund the project, then you become dependent on that money because your cash strapped. The second one is that we made sure that the people who are in the organization understand that you cannot wait for someone to come and save you. So the solution will not come from the state. It will be imposed upon policymakers within the state. The French left has been the first one to promote the banning of Muslim visibility, especially for Muslim women. I'm not talking about the far right. I'm talking about the French left with their, left-wing ideology, and religion is, the opium of the people, etc. What we do First, we have to be able to master the information. We shouldn't wait for white journalists to go and tell us about a problem. If the issue is of concern to us, we do our own investigation. We don't wait for the Intercept or their Mediapart or whatever to come and investigate. Which means at any moment we feel there's a problem, get someone to do the investigation, get all the facts so we understand what's going on. And the second part is, of course, and this is very challenging because, with the COVID-19, we haven't been able to do it on the scale we wish to, is to properly, give the tools to the people. Feed the people with critical analysis so they are aware of what's happening around them. And of course, right now, we can't do any litigation. Right now, it's about advocacy. And because we don't have a platform in France, there is a consensus. Either they are quiet about it, that's the best, or they are outright, with the government, and these laws are good laws, etc. So what we do is advocacy on international platforms. So it was the BBC, it was CNN, not that much, BBC, Al Jazeera, TRT, The Guardian, any international channel gives us a platform, we go out there and do it. And the positive outcome of this is that the elements and the bullet points have been disseminated. So people now are picking up on these ideas because, I'm glad, as I speak French, English, and Arabic, so I can speak on those, outlets, which means that if I am kicked out the door, I'm coming through the window by going through international media outlets. And this paid off because Emmanuel Macron is extremely upset with international news outlets. He's upset with the New York Times. He wouldn't give an interview to the Washington Post. He's upset with Politico, the Financial Times. So right now it's like, okay, your castle may be sealed, but we're going to surround it. And I'm glad that international journalists can be criticized on many topics, but when it comes to France, they kind of give us a platform. And I'm also thankful for CAIR for caring about these issues. I spoke with Faizan in Dallas, where I used to live before when I was a student, and the interest by Hussam Ailouche in LA. Actually, I went in 2017 in LA to just preach and say and try to find some allies, and 3 years down the line, it's paying off. So this is the advice I give to any Muslim minority in the West. If you are shut down at home, go around them and make noise on the outside, because all these countries, they don't want to look bad because they keep lecturing the rest of the world on human rights and civil liberties. And today, everybody knows, as you said, Edward, what the heck is going on in France. And that's because we have been, not us alone, but there have been, a continuous effort to kind of, expose what's happening at home.
Right.
Gotcha. So Yasser, I think we're out of our set questions, but I want to ask you one more thing, which is, how does this end? I mean, Allah knows best where this is going, but it seems to me that if Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are competing for the far right, and if they're likely to be the two presidential candidates, Emmanuel Macron seems like he's a horrible actor, but it seems like Marine Le Pen would take you into a really dangerous place that, Western Europe has not been in since, pre-World War II in terms of treatment of minorities. So, where do you think this is going? What are your concerns? What are your hopes? Essentially, what's the worst case scenario here that could be coming in the next months or years? And what are you hopeful for? What is the good scenario you're working for?
Right now we are heading straight for the wall. It's not going to get any better. All observers, even on the podcast, the breakdown, I had my ideas, but I would like to have others, and they all share the same pessimism when it comes to France, because when you see the worst, the bad and the worst competing, nothing good is going to come out of it. So first, people shouldn't really worry about Marine Le Pen being in power because her ideas are already in power. So we don't need Marine Le Pen to be president for her agenda to be implemented, which is already bad. Now, of course, if Marine Le Pen comes to power tomorrow, she wouldn't even have to pass further restrictive legislation when she gets to power because everything is in place. And for people, when they travel to France and go look for the Eiffel Tower and take selfies, just know when you go to France, there is a permanent state of emergency. When we speak about right to privacy, we have the law on mass surveillance that allows the government to listen to our conversations. We have an extremely weak judiciary. And now on top of it, they are passing this law that will prohibit, filming the police, to take police away from accountability in the midst, of the post-George Floyd racist murder, to make things worse. Now, because France is based on a very shaky political system, highly centralized, highly authoritarian, called the Fifth Republic, born in 1958 after a coup d'etat during the war in Algeria. So we see this current political regime was born in the midst of the colonial repression in Africa. On top of it, it is a system that gives tremendous powers to the president, all right, with very, very few checks and balances and oversight. And because of that, it has encouraged, corruption. It has encouraged the most incompetent people, but most shrewd, to get in power. It means we are witnessing a crumbling regime. And because a regime is crumbling, the best and the worst can be expected. It all depends on what offer will be there when these events happen. I don't want to sound tragic, but our political system is completely unsustainable. It's not working. And the fact that Emmanuel Macron, within 2 years, he went from being an unknown man to become president, I mean, like, nobody knew his track record. So what if I come to the US and within 2 years I'm the president? You will be like, we like Yasser, but I think we deserve better than him. So something with Emmanuel Macron, you're like, okay. And he actually shows that France is also at a crossroads. And the fact that you see the government protecting its police further, making accountability even more difficult, reinforcing its repressive apparatus and criminalizing dissent, they know they're up to something that's going to be extremely challenging. Now, again, it's on us. Now, if the president wants Muslims to embrace the French values, why not? French values gave us the revolution. Just saying.
Fascinating, Oscar. I mean, you've shed so much light on number one, I think the state of affairs there. Number two, I mean the utter hypocrisy of France's claims to be a beacon of democracy right now, but also given us some comfort to know that organizations like yours are still there, still putting up the good fight, and still speaking truth to power. Hudayfa, do you want to close out with any remarks or final question?
Well, thank you, Yasser. I really appreciate the work that you're doing with CGL and the work on the ground in France. And we just want to, if you can also tell us a little bit about your podcast, so for our audience, and so they can tune into it whenever it's live.
Yeah, and any website where people can visit, any other way to support your work, yeah, please let us know. Hold on, you're muted, Yasser. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, actually, I set up the Breakdown, which is a podcast, because I saw that, in white majority, medias, non-whites don't have a platform. And from my own experience is that they would bring in Black, South Asians, Muslims, Roma people when they come to complain and say how much it hurts to face discrimination, racism. But when it comes time to bring an analysis, to bring solutions, they always invite white people. So it becomes a white-to-white conversation, and non-whites are just witnesses of a world in which they have no agency. So the goal here is to have a platform where we can discuss all the events, not only about Islamophobia or Muslim, centric problems, but everything from national security to social uprisings, to police brutality, to foreign policy, etc., to taxes. So we can normalize the idea that non-white people can analyze this world, and because they experience the same problems as white people, they can also bring in their own solutions. And maybe it's also time for white people to start listening to non-whites, where they also tell them, okay, here is a problem, here is a solution. Maybe that conversation would put us on an equal foot basis when it comes to disseminating ideas and debating on whether our societies should go this way or the other.
Fascinating to hear that some of the discussions going on in France sound so similar to discussions that have been happening in the United States for a long, long time. Yasser, thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe in France. Keep up the good fight. Let us know if there's anything we can do. CAIR is absolutely happy to work with French Muslims to stand up against Islamophobia and for justice and freedom all around the world. So reach out to us anytime. Let's stay in touch, inshallah. And may Allah protect you and grant you success. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Hudayfa, thank you so much for co-hosting today. It was a pleasure. And we look forward to, I think we're going to be working a lot on international Islamophobia in the coming years. Is that right, Hudayfa?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. So look forward, everyone, to more information about some projects CAIR will be pursuing related to combating international Islamophobia, and also making sure that, just like we were sitting here uniting with Yasser, that Muslims around the world are uniting to stand up for justice for all people, not just us, but for all people, inshallah. So with that, thank you all for watching. Thank you, our listeners on American Muslim 360. Thank you to everyone watching online. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. And last thing, I want to remind you that CAIR's annual banquet this year is virtual, not in person, obviously. It will be this weekend, December 19th, inshallah, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., inshallah. We're going to have some great guests. Imam Zaid Shakir will be our keynote speaker. We're also going to get special messages from Representative Rashida Tlaib, Representative Andre Carson, hear from some other great speakers, and hear about the great work CAIR is doing and how you can support our work going into the new year, inshallah. So this weekend, December 19th, inshallah, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., visit CAIR.com or our Facebook page to RSVP for that event. And we will see you on Sunday, inshallah. Until then, assalamu alaikum.